Hello, I'm Daniela. In today's video, I want to delve a little deeper into the topic of ORTs, O-R-T. I did a previous video where I explained what they were, just the threadlings as I call them, or the thread scraps that you get anytime you do a stitching project. Now some people save these in a jar, an ORT jar, and they use them throughout the year, or they just let them sit. Now you can use them as stuffing for small little projects like little cushions or pillows, but I wanted to show you how I use them in my stitching. And in today's video, I give an example of how I stitch them into a shape to add dimension to my slow stitching piece. It adds a textured element that adds interest and height, as well as a very interesting texture to whatever shape I create. Now here's my process along with some variations. So here's one way that I use my ORTs, my threadlings. I have my little jar here with all my little threadlings. And so for this project, I know that I'm going to stitch just a shape here, and it could be any shape. And I think I'm going to make something like a long heart. So I just go through my little thread scraps here, and I want to stick with this color scheme. So I'm going to look for some golds and beiges. So I'll just start sorting them out. Maybe I'll use some browns in there as well. And I'll just choose through these little ORTs, these little threadlings, until I have a series of threads that will work for this project. If I have some other colors thrown in there, that's okay. I like the way that adds a little contrast, and it picks up some of the colors that I have in this piece. So I'll just take a few more strands, grab some neutral ones as well, and throw that together. So now I have my little pile here of scraps. I'm just going to try and form them into a shape. Because I want to have an elongated heart, it's going to be kind of a rectangle. So I'll take some of these pieces and I'll pull some aside. But for the most part, I'll take this piece and make that elongated rectangle. And I could trim this up as I need. And this is just really an interesting textured element to my piece. And I can make this as abstract as I want. I know I want the heart to be here, so I'll kind of just play with it until I have it in the right position, and then I'll take some thread on a needle in a color that I can hide my stitches with, and I'll just come up from the center and just start anchoring it down into place. And right now I'm just going for a generic shape here, just a generic rectangle shape, trying to get approximately the height and the width of this heart that I want. So I have a few stitches that really anchor it down, and now I can start carving out that shape. I'm going to make that center divot in the top of the heart that kind of allows the two sides to really show through. So I'll pull that stitch down, making that center of the top of the heart, and then I'll stitch to either side of it to really showcase that nice curve of that heart. And I'll work on one side right now, building up that heart shape. So I'll come out to the edge, and again, just add a stitch or two to hold these threads in place. And I'll continue to play with them, creating that heart shape. Now some threads will stick out, and that's okay, because I know that each time I add a stitch, I'll build that shape a little bit better and a little tighter. So I just kind of go around and I decide how deep I want that heart to be. I think right to there is a nice height for that heart. And I'm going to just flip this over and come around here. So now my heart is actually starting to become triangular shape. And that's a good starting point for me. I'll tack a few stitches down, and I can come back in and tack a few more as this shape is starting to take hold. Now you can use any shape you want, and it's just an added interest to my piece. It adds a little dimension, and depending on the colors that I use from my ORTs here, my threadlings, I start to get a shape. So I'm just going to try and stitch down this basic inverted triangle, and then we'll come back and stitch on those little lobes to each side of the heart. So I'm just going to continue adding a few stitches here and there, holding down those unruly threads and just trying to make that point at the base right now. So I'll come up and pull that down. So I have a very rustic heart, but I want to work on it more to make it a little more obvious that it's a heart. So I'm just going to make a few more stitches and then just play with it, trying to shape that heart. So I'll come to the side here, pull up my stitch, and then pull it back down. And right at the top here, I can hold that down right into place. Flip it over. I will knot this thread, and I'll thread my needle again with a new thread so I can really fine-tune this shape. So now I've rethreaded my needle. I have the beginning of a heart shape here, but as you can see, it's more of an inverted triangle. So I'm just going to press it into position, and now I'm going to take some of the leftover orts that I saved from the side, and I'm just going to clip them into smaller pieces that I can deal with. And now I'm going to take each little section that I clipped and just make those little lobes on this heart. So I just kind of scrunch all those shapes together, and I can put that right up here for the top of that lobe. I'm going to pull my needle and thread through that and anchor it into place, holding all those stitches down. And really build up the shape of this heart. I'll come from the side. And just pull it over, taking any little stragglers and locking them in place. And then I'll grab my remaining threadlings, roll them around again to get a shape, and create that second lobe on the other side here. And I'll stitch those into place. And again, I just hold this down and it adds a bit of texture. Now I'll play with it, really pulling that center lowest point of that heart down and stitching it in place. I'll add a few more stitches just to anchor my thread, knot it off on the back, and then with a pair of scissors, I can just trim up anything that stands out that I don't want on this heart. And so these are any of the threadlings that really stand out and distract from the actual shape that I'm looking for. So now that I have that shape, I want to really emphasize it. So I'm just going to take some black thread and just make a little bunch of stitches all the way around the outline of this heart. So I just come up at the bottom point and I really emphasize the shape. And this gives me another border right around the edge of that heart. Now this is not necessary in all cases, but for this one I really felt like I needed something a little more to make this heart stand out. I could also go back in and trim any of the edge that stands out. So there I finished stitching around the heart to make it stand out a little more. It's a subtle effect, but it adds a totally different element to my piece, and it was all done using scraps that wouldn't really have a purpose otherwise. Now I want to show you some different variations using that same technique of using a simple shape and your threadlings. So here are 3 different shapes using the threadlings in just basic cookie cutter shapes. I have a circular shape here, a heart done with pinks, so I kind of really went through my supplies and just chose the colors I wanted. And here's just a bar of just neutrals, and it adds an interesting element. Something like this with the texture could be something as simple as moss, or as something as intricate as fur on an animal, maybe dog fur or fur from a sheep. So that's a fun effect that you get from using your ORTs or your threadlings, your just leftover thread scraps. So that's how I create a stitched heart using threadlings. It's kind of a fun little effect, and by outlining it with contrasting thread, you get a different result as well, and you can make it really stand out. But you don't always have to outline your little ORT shapes or your threadling shapes. They can just be something unique that you add to your stitching, using the beauty of the color of your threads. So how do you use your ORTs, your threadlings, in your work? Comment down below for some great ideas that we can all share. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Thanks for joining me today.